dim the lights, get yourself cozy, and if you've got a cup of tea nearby, maybe hold it with both hands. Because tonight, we are stepping back into a world where scissors weren't just for trimming your hair. They were for trimming just about everything. Welcome to the weirdly multitasking world of the medieval barber-surgeon, a profession where one day you're shaving beards, the next you're pulling teeth, and by lunchtime, you're performing minor surgery, all without washing your hands. Ready? Let's begin. You wake up to the sound of something halfway between a rooster and a minor accident. Turns out, it's both. The neighbor's chicken has managed to get itself stuck in a cartwheel again. Classic. You crack open one eye, stretch, and remember, you are not a knight, not a nobleman, not even a humble blacksmith. You, dear friend, are a barber-surgeon, a living contradiction in the flesh. Half hairstylist, half amateur doctor, and fully underpaid. Your room is generously described as a room. Realistically, it's a narrow upper floor chamber above your rented shop. The walls are timber, drafty enough to whistle tunes through, and the window is a rectangular hole with a wooden shutter. No glass. That's for people who can afford to not catch pneumonia in winter. Your bed consists of a thin straw mattress, which you share with your dreams, a blanket that smells like damp hay, and a pillow that might technically be a sack of old feathers. Before you even get out of bed, you mentally go over today's likely workload. 3 shaves, 2 haircuts, 1 tooth extraction, and a boil lancing at noon. Lovely. You sit up, scratch your head, and immediately regret it. Lice. Occupational hazard. There's no time to laze around. The town's already awake. The bells from the abbey are ringing, signaling that it's well past sunrise, and you have customers who will be banging on your door soon enough, demanding you fix their faces, heads, and bodily embarrassments. The morning routine is simple. Splash some cold water from the bucket you filled last night. No soap too expensive, but you do rub some fragrant herbs under your arms, because, at least you don't want to pass out from your own smell. You put on your best tunic. It's brown, patched in 4 places, and it technically covers everything, so that's a win. Your apron, stiff from yesterday's blood splatters, goes over it. You wipe it down with a damp cloth, because hygiene, medieval edition. Downstairs is your pride and joy, your shop, a narrow wooden storefront with a door that creaks in every direction. Outside hangs the universal symbol of your trade, the red and white striped pole. Red for blood, white for bandages, and a twist of irony, because most days, your hands are covered in both. You don't have much in the way of tools, but what you do have is terrifyingly multifunctional. A pair of scissors sharp enough to skin a rabbit, a razor that could easily double as a defensive weapon, a selection of sharp knives, a pair of pliers not specially crafted, just adapted, a basic saw, and a small iron bowl for collecting. Blood in the corner is your prized possession, the bloodletting stool, crafted from sturdy oak, with a little groove to rest your arm, and a bucket underneath. Modern-day clients get massages, yours get blood drained. Fair trade. Honestly, the day kicks off with your first client, Oswin, the baker. He's in his 30s, looks 50, and smells like burnt flour and desperation. He wants a shave. His wife threatened to refuse him dinner unless he stopped looking like a wild man. You boil some water in your little kettle, not because you care about sanitation, but because warm water softens hair better. With your rusty straight razor, you go to work. Oswin winces, hisses, but says nothing. That's trust. Or fear. You aren't sure anymore. Midway through, he casually mentions a tooth that's been aching. You nod sagely, because you've dealt with this 100 times. Once the shave is done, and your blade nicks his cheek only twice. Not bad. You bring out the real villain, your iron pliers. They're technically made for metalwork, but teeth are teeth. Oswin reclines in the chair. You wedge your knee against his chest, because leverage is a friend, and after a few curses, some tears, and one solid yank, The offending tooth comes out, root and all. You triumphantly hold it up like a trophy. He spits blood, gives you a thumbs up, and leaves lighter by 1 tooth and 2 silver pennies. By now, the shop smells like a battlefield: sweat, blood, and rosemary oil. You wipe your hands on your apron, swig a mouthful of cider, and greet the next customer, Lady Marion's house servant. She's come to fetch you. The lady has a boil on her thigh that needs a dressing, and by a dressing, she means slicing open with your sharpest knife and hoping the fever doesn't take her. You pack your tools in your leather pouch, sling it over your shoulder, and head towards the manor house, your boots squelching in the morning mud. The village streets are alive, vendors yelling about fresh fish which smells like last week's fish, children running around without pants, and the occasional town crier bellowing royal decrees no one listens to. You march forward. The local hero people both need and avoid at the manor. You get ushered in through the servants' entrance, because barber-surgeons may be useful, but they aren't noble company. Lady Marion is waiting, perched on a cushion, wincing as she points to an ugly, angry red lump on her upper leg. You nod like a seasoned professional, even though in your head you're just hoping she doesn't die, because dead nobles tend to create legal problems. You heat your knife over a candle flame, murmur something about releasing the bad humors, and make the slice. Pus bursts out like a miniature volcano, filling the room with a stench that kills everyone's appetite for lunch. You mop it up with linen, apply a rough herbal paste, and wrap it up tightly, assuring her it'll feel better within a week. Hopefully, she pays you 3 silver coins and a loaf of bread, which in your line of work counts as a very successful morning. Back at your shop, it's only midday, and you've already shaved, sliced, and yanked your way through multiple customers. You munch on your bread while checking your tools. Blades need sharpening, the bowl needs rinsing, and you debate boiling your scissors, but decide against it. Waste of firewood. Just when you think you can relax, a knock rattles the door frame. It's the town watchman, a man built like an ox, but with half the intelligence. He's brought in a drunk who managed to split his forehead open, falling off a cart. You glance at the gash, grab your needle and thread, and settle in for some crude but effective stitching. You wash the wound with a mixture of water and stale wine, disinfection, medieval style, and start threading through the skin. The drunk rumbles, the watchman shrugs, and you expertly knot off the final stitch, slapping a patch of cloth on top. Payment? 1 copper coin, and free beer at the tavern later. Could be worse. You wipe the sweat off your brow, glance at the line of customers forming outside your door, and sigh. The day's barely halfway done, and already you've danced with blades, blood, and bodily fluids. There are still haircuts to give, blood to let, and someone mentioned a nasty ingrown toenail that will probably make you gag before dinner. But that's life. A medieval barber-surgeon's life. A profession where every day you snip, slice, and stitch, and every evening you wonder if you're the town's healer, or simply a slightly more hygienic butcher. And tomorrow, well, you'll wake up, sharpen your blades, and do it all over again. Because in this world of mud, steel, and superstition, someone's got to pull the teeth, drain the blood, and keep the townsfolk upright, just long enough to drink themselves silly again. And that someone is you. The door creaks as you lean against it, taking a moment to breathe, though you're not sure if that's a good idea. The smell of iron, sweat, and week-old herbs hangs thick in the air. You glance at the midday sun filtering through the dusty shutters, a cruel reminder that you are only halfway through your daily grind of bloodletting, hair trimming, and bodily fluid management. There's no lunch break in this profession. There's barely a concept of rest. You chew on the crust of the loaf Lady Marion handed over, stale but filling, and wash it down with what passes for cider in this town. The cider is warm, slightly vinegary, and you're pretty sure there's something alive floating near the bottom of your mug, but it's better than plain water. At least the cider pretends to be safe. Your next customer is already pushing through. the door before you can swallow your last bite. It's Bertram, the blacksmith's apprentice, shoulders broad, face smeared with soot, and a limp in his left leg that tells you today is about to get messier. He grunts, points to his leg, and you wave him to your wooden chair, the one reinforced with iron nails. After your last patient fell through it, mid-suture, you roll up Bertram's trouser leg, revealing a gash that runs angry and red down his calf, half-healed, but starting to smell like a cheese merchant's worst day. You click your tongue knowingly, because that's what barber-surgeons do, even when they're just winging it. Infection. No need to explain it in Latin. Bertram wouldn't understand anyway. You rummage through your pouch, grab the sharpest knife you have, wipe it on your apron, clean enough, and brace him with one hand. The next part is simple. Cut, drain, and pretend this is perfectly normal. You slice into the wound, thick, pus oozing out like spoiled custard, Bertram cursing his ancestors and gripping the chair until his knuckles turn white. You mutter something about releasing foul humors while wiping the goo with a rag that's already soaked in yesterday's misery. You pack the wound with crushed garlic and goose fat, the medieval equivalent of antibiotics, and wrap it tight. It'll either heal or turn into an exciting case of amputation next week. Bertram groans, pays you with a small pouch of coppers, and hobbles out, leaving you with a warm glow of satisfaction and a shop that now smells unmistakably like infected. Legged outside, the town hums with activity, vendors hollering, church bells tolling for some saint's day you can't be bothered to remember, and children splashing in the mud puddles that double as open sewers. You poke your head out the door and call after a passing boy, Tobias, the local runner for hire, always barefoot and always 3 steps away from trouble. Tobias, you call, tossing him a halfpenny. Fetch me another bundle of yarrow, some clean linen, and see if the brewer's got any old wine on discount. Tell him I'll settle the account next week. Tobias snatches the coin midair and bolts off, likely spending half of it on sugared almonds and the rest on dice games, but you'll get what you need. Eventually, you barely sit down when a familiar face barges in. Widow Agnes, her left eye twitching with suspicion, clutching a bundle, wrapped in rags. You've seen that expression before. It's the fix this before I'm cursed by demons look. She slams the bundle on your table, unwrapping it to reveal a chicken, or what's left of one. Its wing is twisted, feathers missing, and a gash along its side suggests a run-in with the butcher's mean-spirited dog. You raise an eyebrow. Not for eatin'. She scowls. It's me best laying hen. Ah, you're not just barber-surgeon to the town's humans. You're also the go-to for animal emergencies. Of course you are. With a resigned sigh, you set to work. Feather plucking, cleaning the wound, binding the wing with a splint fashioned from broken comb teeth. The chicken eyes you with a mix of fear and paltry resignation. Agnes nods approvingly, drops a fresh egg on your table as payment, and walks out the door. You'll probably fry the egg for dinner, assuming you don't drop dead of exhaustion first. Afternoon drifts on, bringing with it the endless parade of medieval humanity. A farmer, with a dislocated shoulder, popped back in with a satisfying crunch and a yelp that probably scared the baker's cat. A young girl with lice, so advanced they might qualify for citizenship. You deluge her with vinegar and a fine-tooth comb, trying not to gag. Then comes Brother Ambrose from the abbey, with an ingrown toenail the size of a walnut, muttering prayers while you dig it out with a small, blunt knife, pretending this is somehow a holy act. Your arms ache, your apron is now more red than brown, and you can't remember the last time you sat down without someone screaming in your ear. By late afternoon, just as you think you might have an hour's peace, the door creaks open again. This time, it's not a patient, it's old Master Reginald, the town's grumpiest merchant, eyes gleaming with opportunity. He waddles inside, trailing a cloud of lavender water, overpriced and ineffective, and waves a crumpled parchment. "Barber," he wheezes, "the tournament's coming. Knights need clean shaves, polished armor, and someone to patch them up when they fall off their horses. You win, you squint, muscles protesting at the thought of standing in the tournament grounds for hours, but silver coins dance in your imagination. Knights pay well, especially when their squires are useless, and their egos won't let them walk around with black eyes and bruised pride. You nod. A side gig at the tournament means long hours, sure, but also fat purses, and maybe a chance to try stitching something more exotic, like a nobleman's eyebrow. Reginald grins, slapping your shoulder and muttering something about sharing profits, which, knowing him, means you'll be doing the work while he pockets most of the pay. You watch him leave, the door swinging behind him, and rub your temples. Tomorrow will bring more cuts, more screams, and possibly your first nightly client, which means tonight you sharpen your blades. The evening light fades, the streets quiet down, and you finally sit by your little fire. Feet aching, head spinning. You clean your tools, wiping, scraping, occasionally swearing at the stubborn stains that refuse to budge. You mix fresh herbal pastes, refill your leech's jar, and stack your precious linen squares. Preparation is survival in your line of work. As darkness falls, you glance out the window, watching the stars blink to life above the smoky rooftops. The town settles, mothers call their children inside, drunks stumble towards the tavern, and somewhere, a cow starts mooing at nothing in particular. Tomorrow will be another day of snips and slices, of village drama and bodily fluids, of hoping no one dies on your watch, and if they do, hoping they don't have rich relatives. You snuff out the candle, crawl into your straw bed, and let exhaustion wrap you like a scratchy, lice-infested blanket. Because in this little medieval town, surrounded by ignorance, superstition, and very bad breath, you are the healer, the fixer, and sometimes the last hope. And whether it's shaving beards or saving limbs, someone's gotta do it. Might as well be you. Morning comes too soon. The rooster hasn't even found his voice yet, and you're already blinking at the wooden beams above your head, wishing you had chosen a quieter profession, like grave digging. At least grave diggers don't get yelled at by people who are still alive. Your body aches like you've gone 2 rounds with the village millstone. Every muscle screams protest, but the day doesn't care. The town is stirring, and you've got a new appointment list forming in your head before your feet even touch the cold floorboards. Today's tournament day, and that means bruised nights, bloody noses, and maybe, just maybe, a few extra silver coins in your pouch by nightfall. You rinse your face in a bowl of water that's seen better days, run fingers through your hair until it mostly obeys, and down your patched tunic with the least amount of holes. Your apron, stiff with stains from the last few days, goes on as it always does. It feels like armor now, not to protect you from blades, but from complaints. Before stepping out, you load your bag, razors sharpened, bone saws polished, jars of leeches snug in their leather wraps, bandages rolled like little promises of survival, and enough herbal paste to cover a wounded boar, which, knowing tournament crowds, you might have to. Your shop is quieter than usual. Townsfolk have already started heading to the tournament grounds, eager to see shiny armor clash and foolish noblemen get knocked from their horses for sport. You lock up the shop, glance at your barber pole, red and white stripes fluttering in the morning wind, and march toward the chaos. Your worn boots squelching through fresh mud. The tournament grounds are alive. Colorful banners flap in the breeze, merchants hawk roasted meats and watered-down ale, and jugglers toss clubs while eyeing unattended coin purses. The knights are there in full force, some parading around in polished plate armor that would feed your entire town for a year, others sweating buckets in leather and chainmail, looking like they haven't slept in a week. You set up your field station under a crooked tent, more canvas than structure, with a simple stool. Your tools spread neatly on a wooden slab. Reginald, the greedy merchant, appears like a bad smell, demanding his cut of the day's earnings before you've even earned a single coin. You wave him off and focus on the real work. First to arrive is a young squire, his chin sporting the beginnings of a beard that looks more like yesterday's lunch smeared on his face. He needs a shave before attending to his night. You lather him up, nick his skin only twice, and collect 2 copper coins and a muttered thank you. An easy start. You savor it, you know it won't last. Moments later, your day properly begins. A knight comes stumbling over, armor dented, lips split wide enough to park a cart in. He's bleeding from his forehead, nose crooked at a shocking angle, and he's swearing enough to make a monk blush. You wipe your hands, grab your needle and thread, and get to work. There's no privacy here, no back room or quiet chamber. Everything happens right out in the open, surrounded by gawkers and grimacing squires. You stitch the knight's lip while he grips the sides of your stool like it's a holy relic. His blood drips onto your apron, adding a fresh layer to your collection of stains. Before you can clean up, a messenger boy comes sprinting over. Some nobleman fell off his horse, broke his wrist, and would the barber-surgeon kindly come and patch him up before the next joust? You sigh, pack up your tools, and follow the boy, mentally calculating how much to charge for relocating a bone on tournament day. Triple maybe, quadruple if the knight's really annoying. At the noble tent, you're greeted by a red-faced man, gripping his wrist like it's about to escape. He's already drunk, slurring something about how he barely tripped, even though everyone knows he flew 10 feet after a horse took a sharp left. You roll up your sleeves, grip the broken wrist, and with a practiced yank and a muffled scream, you snap it back into place. You splint it with sticks and linen, slap on some pungent salve, and smile like you just delivered a miracle. 5 silver, you say cheerfully. He tries to argue. You stand there, arms crossed, smelling like boiled onions and old sweat, and eventually, the coins jingle into your palm. Money talks, even louder than nobles. The rest of the day passes in a blur. A merchant with a sprained ankle, a cook with a burned hand, a knight with a split scalp, and most peculiar of all, a minstrel who accidentally swallowed a chess piece during a tavern bet. You make him vomit with a mixture of wine and mustard seeds and pocket his gold coin, while he curses your ancestors. By late afternoon, your hands are raw, your back feels like it belongs to a man twice your age, and your throat is parched. Reginald appears again, this time grinning like a fox. He's counted the coins, is already planning to invest in something that will likely never see the light of day. You let him prattle while your eyes scan the dwindling crowd. Then comes the final excitement of the day, the grand melee. Dozens of half-drunk knights swinging swords and maces at each other while the crowd roars for blood. You set your tools beside you, knowing full well you'll be working overtime. Sure enough, the melee ends in chaos. 3 knights are dragged your way, 2 with head wounds, 1 missing 3 teeth, and sporting a dislocated jaw. You jump into action, stitching, bandaging, relocating joints with sickening cracks while squires pass out nearby. The sun dips low in the sky, the shadows stretch, and your hands work on muscle memory alone. By the time you stitch the last knight's scalp, you've earned more silver than you'd see in 2 months back at your shop, but you've also gained enough new stains on your apron to frighten the bravest warrior. As you pack up your tools, Reginald greedily counts his share, and you finally lean back against the cartwheel, exhaling for the first time since sunrise. You survive tournament day. The town begins to quiet, the crowds dissipating, the drunks stumbling toward home, and the smell of roasted meat replaced by smoldering fire pits. You shoulder your bag, heavy with coins, herbs, and linen, and walk slowly back to your shop. It's nearly dark when you push through the creaking door. You light a single candle, setting it on the counter, the flame flickering against your tired face in the grimy bronze mirror. Your hands throb, your knees ache, but your purse jingles. A good day, by medieval standards. You sit, peeling off your stained apron, and pour yourself the last of the sour cider. You toast to yourself for surviving another day, for keeping people stitched together with tools better suited for carving meat, and for enduring a world that treats barbers as everything from healers to butchers. As the candle sputters, you roll your shoulders, glance at the glinting tools, waiting for tomorrow, and smile just a little, because tomorrow the door will creak again. Someone will bang on the shutters. Another bleeding fool will need saving. Another tooth will need pulling. Another boil will need lancing. It never stops. You don't want it to. After all, in a town where people drop like flies, your blades stay sharp, your pouch stays heavy, and your work, bloody, messy, thankless work, stays needed, and that's good enough for you. Night had swallowed the entire town in its heavy cloak. The alleyways, once noisy with merchants and gossiping washerwomen, were now silent except for the cold wind that slithered through every crooked street. You should have been asleep by now, your weary limbs resting after a day that felt longer than a siege. But sleep is a luxury reserved for the dead and the lazy, neither of which applied to a barber-surgeon. Your eyelids were just beginning to fall when it started in urgent, relentless pounding against your wooden shutters. You jolted upright, bones creaking in protest, muscles stiff from bending, pulling, cutting, since dawn. Barber-surgeon, get up, a boy's voice cried from outside, breathless and strained. A lord's retainer's been thrown from his horse by the east gate, his legs twisted badly. You're needed, immediately. You grumbled beneath your breath, not because of the summons, no. You were used to that by now. You groaned because you knew what this meant. A night of blood, broken bones, and likely a very ungrateful nobleman who'd blame you if his limp lingered for life. Still, you rose. Turning away highborn clients was the surest way to lose your head, or at the very least, your livelihood. With practiced speed, you gathered your bag, your tools polished from years of wear, your scalpel sharp, your bone saw gleaming under the weak candlelight. Jars of leeches packed tight, extra bandages rolled snug, and a few sprigs of rosemary to ward off the stench of whatever horror awaited you. The stable boy led you quickly through the emptying lanes. The town had curled into itself for the night. Windows shuttered, doors bolted. Only shadows accompanied you, save for a few drunkards mumbling into the gutter and rats darting between piles of refuse. When you reached the east gate, the scene unfolded like a grim festival, guards holding torches high, their light dancing across armored figures, and in the center of the chaos, a man groaning on the muddy road, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. His silken tunic was smeared with dirt, and his face was red from screaming. Above him, on horseback, sat the noble lord himself, his expression hard and expectant. No time to be impressed. You were there to work. You dropped to your knees, ignoring the mud that soaked through your trousers. Your fingers probed the injury, feeling the brokenness beneath stretched skin. A dislocated knee, swollen and angry, with possible ligament tearing. Hold him down, you commanded, without ceremony. 2 guards obeyed without hesitation, gripping the retainer's shoulders and thighs. You grasped the ankle firmly, breathed out, and with a swift, ruthless jerk, twisted the leg back into position. There was a loud crack, then a howl so fierce it seemed to echo across the sleeping town. The retainer sagged, sweat dripping from his brow, breathing ragged but relieved. With steady hands, you cleaned the wound with boiled wine, applied a paste of herbs that smelled of earth and bitterness, splinted the leg with straight wooden slats, and wrapped it tight with layers of linen. You worked fast but clean, your movements those of a man who had done this too many times to count. The noble lord, satisfied, flicked his hand, and a pouch of silver clattered into your palm. It was heavier than any payment you had seen in weeks. You dipped your head, not low enough to grovel, but just enough to acknowledge the coin's weight. You turned to leave, exhausted, but satisfied. The wind nipped at your cheeks, and the thought of your straw mattress sounded sweeter than anything in the world. But fate, as always, was not finished with you yet. As you walked past the old fountain, you saw a figure standing there hunched, woman wrapped in wool, her face lined with age and worry. "Elspeth?" you asked, recognizing the town's midwife instantly. She stepped forward quickly, voice taut with urgency. "Come quick, lad. Cooper's wife is in labor hours now and the babe's turned wrong. She won't make it alone." You wanted to protest. Your legs were tired, your back throbbed, and your hands felt like lead. But a woman's life and her baby's were at stake. In your world, there was no sleep when blood and life called your name. Without a word, you followed her, winding through the narrow lanes toward the Cooper's cottage. Inside, the air was thick with heat and desperation. The Cooper's wife lay sprawled on the straw-stuffed bed, her skin pale and lips cracked, her cries muffled by exhaustion. The Cooper stood nearby, his broad hands shaking, offering useless prayers. You rolled up your sleeves and set to work, washing your hands with the last of the clean water, muttering quiet reassurances though you knew they meant little. Beside you, Elspeth worked quickly, preparing herbs and warm cloth. Your fingers pressed against the woman's swollen belly, feeling the awkward angle of the baby within. It was a breech birth, a dangerous one. Slowly, carefully, you guided the infant's body into the proper position, your hands moving with deliberate pressure, your jaw clenched against the tension building in the small room. Minutes stretched, like hours. Sweat poured from your brow, dripping into your eyes. But you didn't stop, didn't blink. You coaxed and shifted, whispering encouragement as much to yourself as to the mother, and then a cry. A wet, furious, beautiful cry split the silence. You drew the baby girl into your hands, red and squalling, full of life. You wrapped her in linen and placed her against her mother's chest. Relief flooded the room, the mother's tears mixed with sweat and joy. The Cooper dropped to his knees, blessing every saint he could remember. Elspeth patted your shoulder, her tired eyes soft with gratitude. The Cooper offered a jug of watered ale and a small copper coin. You waved it off. Tonight's work wasn't about payment, it was about duty, about keeping life clinging to this cruel world a little longer. By the time you staggered back through the twisting streets to your shop, the first gray light of dawn had begun to creep over the rooftops. The street cats yawned in alleyways, chimney smoke rose lazily from bakers' huts, and somewhere a rooster finally found his voice. Your body groaned with each step. Your knees buckled as you shoved open your wooden door. Inside, the familiar smell of herbs, oil, and old blood welcomed you home. You lit a single candle, its flame dancing weakly against the growing light. You slumped onto your stool, eyes drooping. Your fingers were swollen, your knuckles raw, but your coin pouch was heavier, and your heart, though tired, felt steady. You'd set bones, delivered new life, and tended to those who couldn't help themselves. Tonight, you'd earned more than coin. Tomorrow, someone else would knock, another wound would gape open, another bone would snap, another child would enter the world screaming, and when it happened, you would rise, blades in hand, head high, ready to work, because this town didn't sleep, and neither did you. You were the Barber-Surgeon, and your work never ended. Morning in the town was a deceptive thing. Sunlight spilled lazily across the market square, golden and forgiving, but beneath its glow lingered the same filth, the same dampness in the walls, and the same restless hunger in the eyes of its people. You, the Barber-Surgeon, woke not to the comfort of rest, but to the relentless hammering of the town's pulse cries in the distance. Bells from the chapel tower, footsteps already echoing outside your door. Your body throbbed in protest, every joint stiff as you eased out of your hard bed. The thick, crusted linen clung to your skin from a night too full of life and death. Fingers cracked, back ached, But your duty was a chain fastened tighter than any iron. You stretched, grabbed a crust of yesterday's stale bread, and washed it down with weak ale before checking your tools again, cleaning each blade with meticulous care, feeling their weight like extensions of your own bones. Before your second bite, the first visitor came a knock softer than before, almost embarrassed. You pulled open your door to find a frail man, gaunt cheeks hollowed, skin pale and slick with sweat, his wife clutching his elbow. Master Barber. He has a swelling under his arms. It weeps, she whispered. You felt your jaw tighten. The plague had whispered through neighboring villages for weeks, and now, it seemed, its black fingers were curling into your town's fragile ribs. You ushered them inside with a curt nod, not because you were fearless, but because fear had no place in your shop. Inside, you lit more incense, set the small brazier to burn rosemary and vinegar-soaked cloth, and studied the man's condition. His armpit bulged with a monstrous boil, angry and purple, pulsing like it held a heartbeat of its own, sweat-coated. His trembling frame, and beneath it, you could smell it that fetid sweetness, unmistakable to anyone who'd tended to the sick during the bad years. Plague. You kept your tone steady, fingers moving with certainty, though your heart gave a little stutter. There was no cure, not truly, but there were rituals, old remedies, methods to coax life back from the brink or at least ease the dying. You heated your iron in the brazier until it glowed a dull red, wiped it clean, and took a sharp blade too, lanced the pustule. Pus erupted, foul and yellow-green, coating your hands, seeping into the rags you pressed against it. The man's cries filled your shop, his wife weeping softly in the corner, but you pressed on, drenched the wound in boiled vinegar, smeared a paste of garlic and onions, wrapped it tightly and whispered half prayers that the infection would bleed out rather than in by the time they left. Your walls seemed to lean inwards, holding your breath hostage within their timber ribs. But the day did not relent. Next came the merchant, plump, arrogant, draped in furs finer than you'd touch in a lifetime. He strode into your shop with heavy steps, demanding treatment for a crooked nose smashed in a tavern brawl, his breath reeking of last night's spiced wine. You patched him up, fingers steady even as he complained, threatened, and tried to barter down your fee. His broken cartilage snapped back into place beneath your thumbs, his yelps echoing through your rafters. He paid reluctantly, tossing coins onto your workbench with disdain. Before storming out without thanks, the third came limping, an old fisherman with a festering cut along his calf, bone peeking through inflamed flesh. His gait was clumsy, his eyes resigned. He had waited too long. You worked in silence, scraping away dead tissue with your smallest knife, cauterizing the edges while the old man bit down on a strip of leather, and then more came. A shepherd with infected thorns driven into his palm, a washerwoman whose hand trembled from a cursed swelling in her wrist, a child with a shattered finger from a careless fall. The town, it seemed, remembered you were still breathing and wasted no time piling their suffering at your door. You worked through it all, muscles numbing to the rhythm, cut clean, stitch bind your hands, smeared with every fluid the body could muster. You stopped only to swallow mouthfuls of tepid ale, wiping sweat from your brow with the back of a bloodied sleeve. By late afternoon, you had cut away rotting flesh, set 2 bones, stitched a dozen wounds, and drained 6 boils. Your shop was thick with the smell of vinegar, iron, and humanity's worst ailments. Yet there was no moment of peace, not for a barber-surgeon who shared no guild, no brotherhood, no shield but his own sharp steel and battered will. Evening. Shadows stretched their long fingers into your narrow window when your door creaked once more, not from desperation, but wealth. A young squire stepped in, cleaner than most, breathing hard. His lord awaited you, his steed having thrown a shoe and him from the saddle, resulting in a nasty gash across his thigh. Your shoulders sagged, but you nodded. Another night would be spent in toil rather than sleep. Another silver pouch possibly awaiting. Another chapter in the unending saga of serving those who ruled while you bled. But this was your life, a constant dance between the festering poor and the vain rich, between pus and perfume, between dying children and swaggering nobles. You were the Barber-Surgeon, and this was the rhythm of your days, to rise before dawn, to mend what others broke, to fight back death with humble tools and tired fingers, and to collapse only when your body could no longer endure. And tomorrow, the knocking would begin again, and you would answer it. The sky had already slipped into its indigo hush when you trudged back toward your crooked little door, shoulders leaden, neck stiff, and coin pouch only slightly heavier than when you'd begun the day. A distant church bell rang the 8th hour of evening, and with it came that strange quiet, the kind that never lasted long in a town like this. Inside your shop, the stale smell of dried blood and boiled bandages greeted you like an old friend. You lit your oil lamp, flames sputtering, before settling into a steady glow. Your tools lay across the scarred wooden bench, dulled by the day's work and demanding your attention before you dared let your bones rest. The iron blades needed to be cleaned, honed, and kissed by the heat of the brazier until they gleamed sharp and pure again. Infection didn't wait, and a lazy edge was a death sentence in this line of work. But before you could even uncork the flask of vinegar, it came a low pounding, not desperate like the morning's knock, but persistent. You closed your eyes, drew a breath, and opened the door. Standing before you was a face you knew far too well to miss, the back alley butcher, a man with fingers like sausages and a reputation for bad debts. Tonight, his lips split crimson across his teeth, one eye purple and swelling shut, his breathing shallow. "Bad luck with the gambling den," he croaked, clutching his ribs. "The lads didn't like my numbers. You didn't need to ask for details." The butcher's ribs were likely cracked, and from the way he winced, one of them was digging dangerously close to his lung. You ushered him inside, cleaned his face with cold water, and started the slow, steady work of pressing and wrapping his ribs, teaching him to breathe short and sharp so the break wouldn't shift inward. Every groan he let out made your own ribs ache in sympathy. The town outside hadn't quieted. From your tiny window, you caught glimpses of the night crowd thickening, drunken footsteps staggering past, lovers whispering against walls, the odd clash of mugs inside the Papina taverns, life in the streets. Even when dark swallowed the rooftops, Tomas left you with a grateful grunt and a handful of greasy coins, and you allowed yourself the briefest moment of stillness. But the calm was only the space between strikes on the anvil. Not long after, a loud commotion echoed up from the southern lanes. You stepped out, wiping your hands, only to see two guardsmen half dragging, half carrying a bleeding youth toward your stoop. His arm was twisted behind him, fabric stuck to a wound that stretched from wrist to elbow, deep enough that even in the lamplight you could see the white gleam of tendon. "Knife fight by the river," one guard explained, breathing heavily. "Idiot boy thought he could steal from the wrong boat. They dumped the boy on your table like a sack of grain." His breathing was ragged, sweat pooling at his temples, and blood soaked your wooden slab before you even reached for your knife. You worked quickly, peeling back flesh, cutting away the ruined bits, sewing the muscles back together like a weaver with broken thread. The boy whimpered, but you had no patience for softness. He was lucky to keep the arm. Lucky the guards thought to bring him to you, instead of letting him bleed out on the docks. As you tied the final knot in his stitches, the town bell rang the 10th hour. You rubbed the crick in your neck, rolled your shoulders, and wondered how much longer your own bones would hold out under this endless weight before you could wipe the blood from your palms. There came another knock this time, softer, hesitant. "A young maidservant stood there, twisting the fabric of her apron, tears making tracks down her dirty cheeks. "Please, mistress is unwell. She's taken ill so fast." can't stop shivering. You followed her up the crooked alleys, up past the richer streets with their cleaner stoops and guarded doors, until you reached a house with flickering candles in every window, a house fighting back sickness with light, as though flame could scare away death. Inside, the mistress, a wealthy merchant's wife, lay drenched in sweat, face flushed red, breath crackling in her lungs. The maid's hands shook as she explained how it had come suddenly, fever taking hold after a visit to the crowded market. Your heart sank. Another fever, sudden and cruel, racing through the bodies of the town. You pressed your hand to the woman's wrist. Her pulse thudded violently. Uneven, her body caught in a battle it might not win. You instructed cool cloths, brewed bitter infusions from dried willow bark and crushed juniper, coaxed sips of herbal broth between cracked lips. But the fever was not one that bent easily to the will of men. You stayed through the worst of it, until her gasps slowed, until the flush faded just a little, until her chest stopped rattling like a broken bellows. It would be a long fight, but tonight you had at least steadied her from the brink. The merchant pressed too many coins into your hand, promising more if she survived the coming days. You didn't promise anything in return. You knew better. You took the money and left, knowing death walked these streets just as faithfully as you did. By the time your weary steps returned to your little shop, the bells had rung midnight. Your feet throbbed in your boots, your hands stained with layers of other people's blood, sweat, and sickness. You slumped down by the dimming brazier, eating a cold bite of bread between mouthfuls of cheap ale, barely tasting it. Your head pounded from exhaustion, but you knew sleep wouldn't come quickly in this town. There were always more knocks waiting, more broken bones, more festering wounds, more gamblers, thieves, and noble fools expecting your blades to save them, more mothers praying for their children, more merchants hiding their sickness behind golden rings, more fishermen pushing through infections to feed their families. You were the Barber-Surgeon, tireless, thankless, a craftsman in a trade of blood and hope, a servant of both life and death. And in this town, you were never out of work. Morning returned, as it always did, not gentle or kind, but blunt and unapologetic. The town groaned back to life, shaking off its evening drunkenness and midnight scuffles. You, the Barber-Surgeon, woke before the bells, though it felt like you had barely closed your eyes. Your body grumbled like an old millstone, but you stood anyway. There was no rest for men like you, not when flesh festered and bones broke. Faster than prayers could mend them, the same rituals greeted you: weak ale, washing down a heel of stale bread, hands splashed in cold water from the basin, fingers flexed stiffly before reaching for the tools laid out like obedient soldiers along your workbench. Steel gleamed back at you, some dulled from the prior day's labors, some freshly honed before the first knock struck your door. It didn't take long. The first to arrive was a blacksmith, thick arms trembling despite his years of forging iron. His face was pale, his mouth set in a grimace that betrayed the kind of pain men like him didn't speak about lightly. Rotten tooth, he confessed through gritted teeth, jaw swollen like a boil about to burst. 3 days now. It's ruined me sleep. You nodded, pointing toward the stool. No time for ceremony. No time for comfort. You grabbed your iron tooth key, wiped it clean, and pressed your fingers hard against the man's jaw. A few muttered prayers later, half whispered, half growled in. You drove the key deep into his gums, locking onto the festering molar. His cry shook your rafters as you wrenched and twisted. Blood mixed with yellowed pus dribbled down his chin, the room thick with the copper stink of infection and agony. One final wrench, a brutal pull, and the rotten thing came free. Roots gnarled like an ancient tree pulled from poisoned soil. You packed his mouth with linen soaked in vinegar, clapped him on the shoulder, and sent him stumbling back into the daylight. The man left lighter by one tooth, but heavier by your fee. But the morning didn't pause for breath. Next came a gaunt woman with a badly set ankle. Bones broken weeks ago by a fall from a cart, healed crookedly beneath rags and makeshift splints. Her husband had tried to fix it himself, but he was a cooper, not a surgeon. And the limb was twisted unnaturally, each step a lurching battle. You frowned, fingers tracing the wrongness beneath her skin. This will not be gentle, you warned. She nodded, lips tightening in resolve, eyes flickering toward the heavens, as if begging whatever distant gods remained too dull what was about to come. You had her bite down on a leather strap, while you braced her leg against your knee. A deep breath, a twist, a sickening crack that echoed through your small shop, and you felt the bones slide back into place beneath your palms. Her scream was muffled, her tears free-flowing, but her ankle now straightened under your careful binding. By mid-morning, you were already drenched in sweat, sleeves stained anew, knuckles aching from force and strain. The day pressed on, merciless. A miller arrived with a hand mangled by his own grindstone, flesh peeled back, knuckles split. You stitched him while his apprentices waited outside, counting coins and whispering about cursed luck. Then came a young girl with a festering wound on her thigh, the bite of some wild dog or rat, leaving angry red streaks up toward her hip. You cleaned it with boiling vinegar, packed it with garlic mash, and prayed the rot wouldn't travel further. By noon, your bench was a battlefield ragged linen piled high, discarded tooth fragments, flecks of dried pus, and blood staining the wood. You stole brief mouthfuls of ale, letting the bitter liquid chase down what little food you could grab, before another knock sounded and another door opened. An old priest, belly round from years of indulgence, shuffled in complaining of stone pains. You knew well the grip of bladder stones. You took your smallest catheter, oiled it carefully, and guided it into place, while he grumbled and sweated beneath your steady hands. The satisfaction of hearing the trapped stream of urine release was a twisted sort of victory, the priest sighing, as relief took over his puffy features. Afternoon settled in with the low murmur of market sounds rising through your street vendors shouting, wheels creaking, children laughing. You barely noticed. The world outside your doorway spun on, but within your walls, it was always the same parade of misery and human fragility. You set another broken finger, drained another boil, cut away blackened flesh from a farmer's gangrenous toe, each case a piece of your never-ending puzzle. Every person a reminder of how fragile life was, how easily the body turned against itself. Evening approached before you could breathe properly, and just as you thought your door might stay closed a while, there came a knock, unlike the others, deliberate, measured, cloaked in self-importance. A merchant draped in a fine tunic, rings glinting on every finger, strutted into your cramped domain with a nose wrinkled at the sight of your crude workspace. I require your services, he sniffed, but I won't sit on that filthy stool. You'll attend me at my estate. You swallowed your irritation. The wealthy cared nothing for your wariness, nor for the truth that their gold-lined pockets had bled townsmen dry for generations. Still, his coin would pay for your winter wood and fresh bandages. So, you gathered your kit, cleaned what you could, and followed him through the winding streets, toward his manor. There, beneath polished beams and marble statues, you found his ailment tan, ugly swelling behind his ear, pulsing and angry, threatening to spread toward his neck, likely the result of some indulgent feast or careless wench. But you said nothing. You drained it swiftly, dressed the wound, and collected more coin than you had in 2 days of honest work. When you finally stepped back out into the evening air, dusk settling like a violet curtain, you felt every ounce of the day in your back and knees. But the purse at your side jingled heavier, your tools wore fresh stains, and your name had been spoken on many lips that dasomed with gratitude, some with curses, but spoken nonetheless. Your shop waited for you, a crooked sanctuary in a world of filth and broken bones. You were the Barber-Surgeon. This was your lifeblood. By morning, bile by noon, sweat by dusk, and coin by night. And come tomorrow, the knocking would begin again. The town's crooked skyline leaned against the dying light as you trudged back to your little workshop, boots scraping along the uneven stones. Behind you, the streets churned with the sounds of the evening meal carts rattling toward home. Shouts from the market, lingering like fading embers, and the occasional squeal of a pig being led to slaughter. Another day had folded itself into night, and your bones hummed with the slow, steady ache only those in your trade understood. Inside your shop, you peeled off your soiled tunic, washing your arms in cold, brown-tinged water, scrubbing until the stains became ghosts on your skin. The tools, those extensions of your calloused hands, sat quietly on the bench, silent, patient, and ever hungry for the next wound to conquer. But you knew too well that the night brought its own rhythm, darker and wilder than the daylight hours. You had barely wiped your hands dry before the first knock came to sharp raps. Impatient, hurried. Opening your door revealed a narrow-shouldered stable boy, clutching his hand within a dirty cloth already soaked through with red. His cheeks were flushed with panic, breaths short and fast. "Bitten," he rasped, unwrapping the rag to reveal the mangled mess of fingers' teeth marks, deep and angry, flesh torn in a ragged crescent. "Which beast?" you asked, already setting out the iron poker, heating it until it glowed mean and orange. "Mad dog, foaming at the mouth," he whispered. Your jaw tightened. Madness in animals meant poison in men. You worked quickly, cleaning, scraping, cauterizing, the hiss of burning flesh mingling with the boy's muffled screams. It was brutal work, but hesitation killed faster than blades. You bound his hand tight, warned him of fever, and sent him limping home. His future uncertain, but his hand at least spared from immediate rot. Not long after, the second knock, a heavy thump from the drunken cobbler who had slipped by the key, splitting his brow open on the iron edge of a mooring post. You stitched him under the dull flicker of lamplight, his breath hot with sour wine as his head lolled against your chest by the hour of the 6th bell. You had dressed a washerwoman's infected foot, drained the swollen knee of a market porter, and lanced the pus-filled lump on the back of a weaver's neck. The work was ceaseless. The faces different, but the injuries often the same, poverty's fingerprints left behind in bruises, in broken bones, in festering wounds. Outside, the town pulsed with drunken life, laughing, shouting, stumbling. You could hear the taverns roaring alive, the clatter of dice against wooden tables, the screech of fiddles tangled with off-key voices. Inside your walls, there was no song, only the rhythm of blade against skin, stitch after stitch, wound after wound, and then came the urgent pounding of fists. You opened to find 2 soldiers supporting a limping man between them, his tunic soaked down to his belt with fresh blood, eyes glassy with pain. Speared, one guard barked, "Sambakali, brawl gone wrong." You ushered them in, clearing your bench, pressing linen to the wound that fountained red from the man's side. It was deep but missed the gut, a blessing you barely trusted. You packed the wound with wine-soaked rags, pressing your palm hard to stem the tide, sweat pooling at your temples as you worked with grim focus. Hours slipped by as you stitched, torn flesh, reset a fractured rib, and cauterized the worst of the wound. The soldiers waited, their armor rattling softly whenever they shifted. When you finally bound the man's torso in clean cloth, one of them pressed a fat coin purse into your hand, a rare moment where silver replaced empty promises. When they were gone, you slumped against the doorframe, muscles trembling from the effort. The brazier hissed, your last candle guttered low, and for a brief, precious moment, the street outside was silent. You dared to think it was finished for the night, until the slow, eerie knock came. It was not urgent, nor hurried, just 3 gentle raps, deliberate and oddly calm. Opening your door revealed a cloaked figure, tall and still, the faint glint of wealth beneath the heavy fabric. When he stepped inside, he caught the edge of fine boots, a glimpse of a polished belt buckle, and the unmistakable smell of expensive oil clinging to his sleeves. "I require privacy," the man said simply, his voice smooth as oiled wood. He pulled back his cloak, revealing a long, shallow cut across his ribs, fresh and bleeding but controlled. A sword wound, but not from battle. You recognized the angle, the precise slice. This was a duelist's mark, gained in some noble courtyard. Far from prying eyes, you said nothing. You had long since learned that certain clients preferred silence, and their coins were thick enough to buy it. You worked by lamplight, washing the wound, stitching it neatly, binding it beneath fine cloth. The man's lips barely twitched at the sting of needle and thread, his posture straight and proud, despite the gash across his side. When you finished, he pressed a golden coin into your palm, heavier than any you had earned in Weeksand. A second smaller pouch followed. "For your discretion," he said, eyes cold but respectful. He vanished into the night without another word, his cloak swirling behind him like a shadow on the wind. When the door shut, the lock clicked home, and you stood there in your dim, bloody room, gold glinting in your hand, body weary beyond words. The town beyond your walls remained restless, but for now your tools could rest. The blades were dulled, the linens dirtied, but your purse was fat, your belly soon to be full, and your hearth promised warmth against the creeping cold. Another night survived, another dozen lives patched together by your worn, steady hands. You were the Barber-Surgeon, a keeper of broken men, a mender of the forgotten, a quiet sentinel in a town that rarely slept, and when the sun rose again, the knocking would return. It always did. When dawn cracked the sky into bruised purple and gray, you were already awake, though it felt like you'd never really slept. The embers in your hearth sputtered low, casting restless shadows on walls, streaked with the grime of a profession that knew no rest. Your limbs were leaden, knuckles stiff, but your mind remained sharp, honed by routine, by necessity, by the simple truth that there was always one more wound waiting. Your back cracked as you stood, boots sliding into familiar grooves by the door. The air outside was cool, the street damp with morning mist. The market carts rumbled awake somewhere beyond the alleyway, fishmongers barking their tired greetings, women from the bakery carrying their trays with shoulders hunched. Life continued, indifferent to your exhaustion. You lit your first candle, washed your hands in water, gone stale overnight, and inspected your tools. The blades, your loyal soldiers, lay waiting, some scarred from yesterday's trials, others freshly sharpened before the candles sputtered out the night before. The tooth key gleamed ominously, the bone saw freshly oiled, needles threaded anew. Each had their place, each knew its purpose. The first knock was softer than most. You opened the door to a child, no older than 10. Red hair plastered against her forehead, cheeks flushed in fever, small shoulders shaking beneath a rough cloak. Behind her, a gaunt woman stood wringing her hands, eyes heavy with worry. "She's burning up," the mother whispered, voice cracking like brittle glass. "Boils, spreading." Your mouth thinned. You'd seen it before, the creeping red lines, the angry swell of flesh, the sickness that came from rotten wells or bad cuts ignored too long. You pulled the child inside, her limbs limp as a rag doll, with gentle hands. You felt her forehead, checked the boils clustered on her arm and along her ribs. They were angry, pulsing, already weeping pus. You muttered a quiet curse under your breath. "Fetch me nettle, vinegar, and fresh cloth." You instructed the mother, who scurried off. You lanced each boil with delicate precision, the smallest knife in your collection, dancing lightly across swollen skin. The girl whimpered but stayed still, your fingers fast as you cleaned each wound, packing them with crushed nettle and dabbing vinegar to keep the rot at bay. Fever would linger, but you had given her a fighting chance. The mother paid with a few battered coins and a promise of eggs from tomorrow's market. You accepted it was enough. Barely had you cleaned your bench when a fisherman arrived, carrying the stink of sea brine and spoiled ale, one hand pressed to his thigh, blood leaking between his fingers. Harpoon slipped, he grunted, face pale. Too deep to stitch myself. You inspected the wound, long, jagged, almost obscene in its violence. You cleaned it with brutal efficiency, wincing inwardly as he clenched his teeth against the needle's bite. Each stitch pulled his flesh together like a poorly sewn sail, but it would hold. It had to. The day rolled forward, unmerciful. A servant girl with a split lip and bruised ribs fell down the stairs, or so she claimed. You didn't press her. You bound her ribs, stitched her lip, slipped an extra dose of willow bark into her pocket before she left. An elderly cooper, bent at the spine, his back riddled with cysts that had grown ripe for the knife. You drained them as he sat stooped, muttering prayers in between hisses of pain. Then came the baker's boy with hands burnt raw from spilled oil, fingers curling, blisters angry and white. You lanced them, dressed them in cool wraps, told him to soak in vinegar water, and sent him limping back to his ovens. Every hour was another body, another wound. You barely remembered to eat some stale crusts between patients. A gulp of weak ale before the next knock summoned you back by late morning. Your arms ached from holding limbs in place. Your throat was dry from shouting instructions, but the town was merciless, and you were its last defense between flesh and rot. The bell tower struck noon when the town's tanner stumbled in, accompanied by two men reeking of cowhide and filth. His leg was swollen, red streaks racing up toward his groin, the skin glossy with infection. "Boar gored me," he gasped, sweat beading at his brow. "Didn't feel it at first. Now it's turned bad." You grimaced. Flesh wound turned poison. You had no choice. You braced him, tied his leg tight above the swelling, gripped your knife, and cut deep, letting the filth drain out in dark, vile streams. His screams rattled the rafters, but his men held him down while you worked quickly, scooping away the rot, packing the wound with salt and garlic, praying it was enough. He paid in coin but his fevered eyes warned you he might not see the week's end. You allowed yourself a single mouthful of broth as you stared out your narrow window. The town beyond didn't care. People haggled in the market, gamblers crowded street corners, drunks staggered from the tavern steps. No one noticed the man who waded through pus and blood while they traded gossip and bread. By early afternoon, your door rattled again. A young apprentice from the smithy, lips blue, breath wheezing like a punctured bellows, smoke inhalation. You mixed honey, onion, and vinegar into a foul brew, forced it down his throat, rubbed his chest with nettle oil, slapped his back until he coughed free, the foulness stuck in his lungs. Minutes later, a tooth extraction to boil lancing, a sprained wrist set beneath rough splints. You thought of rest? Foolishness. The pounding returned a farmer, sweat dripping from his brow, dragging in his oldest son, unconscious. Skin mottled purple around the neck. "Snakebite," he hissed, desperation clawing at his voice. You worked fast, knife slashing above the wound, sucking out the venom, packing it with every herb you could find, praying your knowledge outran the poison curling through the boy's veins. When they left, you leaned heavily against your bench, head throbbing, but you knew it wouldn't stop. Not until the sun dipped low, not until the streets turned quiet, not until the last wound was bound and the last coin clattered into your tired hands. You were the Barber-Surgeon, guardian of the broken, custodian of the sick, a necessary wraith in a town that often forgot how icily skin split, how quickly fever burned, how near death always lurked, and the knocks would return, because misery never tired, and neither could you. Night fell again, just as it always did, slipping like oil across the crooked rooftops, drowning the shouts of the market in heavy stillness. But tonight, something was different. You felt it in your bones, in the quiet ache that stretched from your spine to your fingertips. In the low flicker of your hearth's last flame, in the way your tools sat quietly on the bench, as if knowing their time in your hands was drawing to an end. The street beyond your shutters settled into its familiar rhythm-drunken laughter by the tavern doors, distant hooves clattering along the main road, the soft prayers of mothers ushering their children to sleep. Yet inside your little shop, the air was thicker, the silence deeper. You sat by the window, wrapping your fingers around a simple wooden cup of warm ale, letting the heat ease the stiffness in your knuckles. Candlelight danced across walls, stained by years of blood, sweat, and desperation. It was a room that had witnessed survival, agony, and triumph day after day, year after year, and now, the knocking was gone. You leaned back, listening, half expecting. The familiar thud against the door, the urgent cry for help, the rasp of a frightened father, or the whimper of a fevered child. But no sound came. The door stood still, the street remained quiet, and for the first time in memory, your hands rested idle. The tools lay washed, sharpened, set in their place. The bandages were folded, clean, untouched. The brazier glowed low, unhurried. You stood, joints groaning in protest, and walked to the shelves where herbs had once crowded in chaotic bundles, where clay jars, lined in uneven rows, had stored powders and salves that saved more lives than anyone could count. Now, the shelves were bare, the jars gone, sold to younger hands. Steadier hands, those eager to step into the old rhythm. Your gaze lingered on the heavy leather satchel sitting in the corner, worn soft by decades of service. Inside rested the same blades that had cut through flesh and infection, the same hooks and forceps that had pulled life back from the brink, the same combs and razors that had kept the village's men presentable even in death. You had cleaned them for the final time. At dawn, you would walk away. The thought settled heavy on your chest, but strangely, it brought no sadness, only quiet, only calm. Your life had been a dance of wounds and healing, of fevered nights and brutal days, of scraping coin from calloused palms and bringing comfort where no one else dared. You had stitched 100 gaping wounds, pulled countless rotted teeth, carved away sickness before it stole breath and soul alike. You had been the shadow people sought when bones broke and flesh tore. But now, your hands craved stillness. Your feet, which had trodden every muddy lane, every crooked alley, longed for cleaner paths. And your heart, battered by the cries of the wounded and the grief of those you could not save, desired peace. You took a final walk around your little room, tracing the rough grain of your workbench, pressing your palm to the worn surface of the doorframe, pausing to remember every voice that had crossed your threshold. The baker's boy, who always smiled through tears, the widow with the endless cough, the merchant with gout so severe you once had to cut his boot from his foot, the mothers who brought fevered children bundled in cloaks too thin for winter, the soldiers, the farmers, the forgotten souls who had no coin but who paid in eggs, bread, or whispered blessings. You had been their last hope, and now it was time for someone else to bear that torch. You pulled on your cloak, tied the satchel to your belt, and stepped outside. The wind was cool, crisp, carrying with it the smell of river water and damp earth. The moon hovered low and fat, casting silver light across the empty street as you locked your door for the final time. You felt no regret. You had given the town your strength, your skill, your endless nights, and tonight, it repaid you in quiet. You walked toward the edge of the village, toward the narrow path that led beyond the hills, away from the endless knocks, from the rattling lungs and weeping wounds, from the constant pulse of pain that had filled your life. Tomorrow, you would wake to birdsong instead of blood, to sunshine instead of screams, to stillness instead of fever. Tomorrow, you would remember what it felt like to be simply a man, not a healer, not a barber-surgeon, not the last desperate hope of broken bodies. And with each step, your shoulders grew lighter, your heart steadier, your pace quicker. You would always carry the scars of those you'd saved and those who hadn't, but you had earned your peace. For the first time in years, there was no one left to fix. No bones to set, no wounds to sew. Just you, just the road ahead, and the quiet, at last.